You felt it before you understood it, that strange quiet forming around your life, the way rooms would pause when you entered, the way eyes lingered a second longer than comfort allowed. This is not coincidence, and it never was. You were not overlooked, you were observed, studied, measured. Long before you ever thought to ask why things felt heavier around you, something had already noticed the disturbance you carried without knowing its name. This is not a message meant for everyone, and you sense that too. Some people move through the world like background noise, but you never did. Even in your silence, you registered as a signal. Even when you tried to disappear, attention found you in subtler ways. The world does not gather silence around weakness. It gathers it around volatility, around potential that has not yet declared itself. Not because you were small, but because you were unclaimed power moving through spaces that did not know how to contain you. There were moments you mistook this for invisibility, for being ignored or undervalued, but that was the disguise doing its work. Concealment feels like absence to the one being hidden. Understand this now. Nothing that watches you does so casually. Nothing studies you without reason. Not with empathy, not with malice, but with interest. The kind reserved for anomalies that do not fit expected patterns. That is why your life never unfolded cleanly. Why answers arrived late. Why certainty kept just out of reach. Pressure was applied without explanation. Doors closed without warning. You were being slowed, not stopped. Tested, not erased. This moment is not an awakening. It is a recognition. The voice you are hearing now does not introduce you to something new. It names what has always been true. You were never meant to be loud early. You were never meant to be obvious. You were meant to accumulate weight in silence until your presence alone altered the room. What happened to you was not the story, it was the signal flare. And now, whether you are ready or not, the phase of concealment is ending. The watching has shifted. The quiet has sharpened. And what recognizes you now does so with certainty. What you endured was never random, even when it felt chaotic and personal. The harm did not arrive because you were weak or careless. It arrived because something in you registered as unresolved power. Predators do not hunt what is empty. They sense density before it becomes visible. They test boundaries, apply pressure, look for fractures, not to destroy at first, but to control. That is why the damage followed a pattern. Different faces, similar outcomes. Different settings, same tightening feeling. You were not unlucky. You were targeted by instinct, by people who recognize potential, the way animals recognize threat. Long before you named it, they felt it. They tried to shrink you, redirect you, dull your edges. They labeled you difficult, distant, strange, ungrateful, anything that would justify the pressure they placed on you. Isolation was not a consequence, it was a tactic. Confusion was not accidental, it was engineered. When you look back now, stop revisiting moments and start tracing lines. See how the harm always appeared when you were growing quieter, more aware, less available. Notice how betrayal arrived when you began to outgrow the roles assigned to you. Pain was not punishment, it was resistance. Resistance only meets movement. Pressure only meets substance. Nothing presses against what has no value. Every attempt to break you was an attempt to access what they could not own. They wanted your energy disorganized, your focus fractured, your self-trust delayed. It was meant to echo, but echoes reveal structure. What you survived confirms that you carried weight before you carried language for it. You were not harmed because you were exposed. You were harmed because you were potent and unclaimed. This is the inversion most never reach. The wound is not evidence of failure. It is proof of density. Something solid was struck. Something valuable was pressured. Something dangerous to the wrong hands was sensed early. Detach from the emotion long enough to see the architecture. The same hands that hurt you followed the same script. The same excuses were used. Same confusion was planted. Patterns do not form around accidents. They form around assets. It becomes data. It becomes confirmation. It becomes the record of how much force was required to slow you down. There was a point when the atmosphere around you shifted before your thoughts ever caught up. People reacted to you differently while you were still moving the same way, speaking the same way, holding yourself the same way. Eyes lingered with calculation instead of familiarity. Conversations softened, then sharpened. Access became conditional. This is how awareness begins outside you first. Others sensed movement before you named it. Not growth as celebration, but growth as disturbance. Silent envy does not roar, it studies. Quiet monitoring replaces open hostility. When fear learns restraint, you are no longer being confronted, you are being measured. Small manipulations appeared disguised as concern, advice, or coincidence. Timing became strange. Interference grew subtle. This is not personal malice. It is systems reacting to unpredictability. The individual who harmed you is no longer central to the story. They were a function, not the source. The environment that excused, enabled, or ignored the damage is what matters now. Structures protect themselves instinctively. When harm accumulates, it leaves marks that cannot be erased by silence. Patterns of control, pressure, and suppression eventually surface upstream. Questions begin to form where accountability was once absent, not because anyone suddenly cares, but because disruption attracts attention at higher levels. Damage is traceable. Fear leaves residue. Someone above the noise has noticed inconsistency, outcomes that do not align with narratives. This is where the balance shifts. You are no longer positioned as prey reacting to isolated harm. You are evidence of a malfunction, proof that something below failed to contain what it tried to manage. The scrutiny is no longer emotional, it is structural. You do not need to speak or accuse or expose. The record exists without your participation. The stillness you hold now changes how others move around you. They hesitate, overcorrect, watch their words, not because they know the truth, but because they sense that observation has widened. You are no longer being hunted by individuals. You are standing at the intersection of patterns that have begun to alert the system itself. And systems do not investigate without reason. This is not numbness. Numbness is chaos, disguised as calm. What is happening now is refinement. Your perception sharpens as emotion withdraws from the surface and settles deeper inside you. Noise becomes unbearable, not because it is loud, but because it is empty. Shallow conversations feel invasive. Unnecessary explanations feel like self-betrayal. You start choosing silence, not as avoidance, but as accuracy. Words are no longer spent to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending your intentions. You stop narrating your pain, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Something in you recognizes that access must be earned, not granted by habit. Boundaries begin to form without speeches or warnings. They appear in timing, in absence, in the way you no longer rush to respond. It is structural. It reorganizes your inner world with precision. Emotions no longer spill outward, they align inward. You observe more than you react. You listen longer than you speak. The need to prove dissolves because proof is no longer external. Your inner temperature drops, but not into coldness. It drops into control. Clarity replaces urgency. Detachment replaces exhaustion. You notice how people respond to this shift. Some grow uneasy. Some attempt to provoke emotion to confirm they still have access. Others retreat, sensing the weight of your presence increasing. You feel heavier now, not burdened, but grounded. Your movements slow because you no longer chase momentum. Momentum begins to orbit you. Decisions are made with fewer words and longer pauses. You are not withdrawing from life. You are withdrawing from noise. What remains is a sharper signal, one that does not need volume to be felt. Gravity increases when mass concentrates. This is the internal turning point where chaos loses influence and precision takes over. You are not disappearing. You are condensing. Your presence no longer blends into the background. It settles. It changes temperature. Conversations adjust their pace when you enter. People choose their language more carefully without knowing why. This is not intimidation. It is gravity. Dominance does not announce itself when it is real. It stabilizes the environment and forces others to orient around it. You no longer push energy outward to be seen. Your stillness does the work. Restraint has replaced reaction, and observation has replaced impulse. This is where control begins to feel effortless. Others sense it and grow uneasy, not because you are aggressive, but because you are unreadable. Unpredictability without chaos unsettles systems that rely on emotional access. You no longer supply explanations that soften tension. You allow silence to complete its own sentences. Somewhere below your awareness, the figure who once attempted to dominate you has shrunk. Not through confrontation, not through exposure, but through irrelevance. They are standing under attention they do not feel yet. You do not need to demand justice when power has already relocated. Influence no longer flows toward the loudest voice, but toward the quietest center. You have become that center. Rooms reorganize subtly around you. People reveal themselves without interrogation. Nervous laughter, over-explaining, sudden politeness, misplaced confidence. You watch without attachment. Observation has become leverage. You no longer chase closure because closure implies dependence on response. You have stepped beyond that loop. What once tried to corner you now exposes itself through movement, through defensiveness, through unnecessary gestures. Stillness becomes a mirror others are forced to face. The more composed you remain, the more the imbalance reveals itself. This is not about victory. It is about position. Power does not need to strike when it has already shifted the field. You feel it now as a quiet certainty, a settled weight in your chest, a calm that does not seek agreement. The system adjusts around mass, and you have become mass. Something fundamental releases its grip inside you, and with it goes the constant reach toward others for confirmation. The hunger for validation fades first, not with disappointment, but with understanding. Recognition no longer feels necessary when your alignment is intact. Revenge loses its appeal because it would require re-entry into a system you have already exited. You stop moving toward others out of habit. Some drift closer, confused by the absence of pursuit. Others fade entirely, unable to exist without friction. Both outcomes feel neutral. Your focus turns inward, not in isolation but in order. Energy is allocated with discipline. Chaos is not fought, it is bypassed. You notice how much quieter your mind has become without the constant management of reactions. Identity begins to simplify. Roles drop away. Explanations shorten. Preferences sharpen. What remains is stronger because it is no longer diluted by performance. You are no longer reactive because you are no longer available to every stimulus. Selectivity replaces defense. You choose where to place attention, and attention becomes your most guarded resource. Self-loyalty is no longer an idea. It is an operating principle. This creates a quiet satisfaction that does not announce itself. You no longer need to be understood by many when you are understood by yourself. Accessibility diminishes without bitterness. Boundaries hold without enforcement. People sense the shift and adjust or disappear. Neither outcome disrupts you. You are not withdrawing from connection. You are refining it. Silence deepens, not as absence, but as structure. Time stretches. Patience grows. Focus sharpens. The impulse to explain fades because your life no longer requires translation. This is not detachment from humanity. It is detachment from distortion. When you stop seeking, you stop signaling need. When need dissolves, leverage disappears from the hands of others. What remains is a steady internal order that does not depend on response, applause, or conflict. You are no longer becoming, you are maintaining. And maintenance is quieter, steadier, and far more powerful than pursuit. Nothing rushes you anymore. You watch dynamics unfold without inserting yourself into them. Patterns reveal themselves quickly when emotion is no longer clouding perception. People expose their motives through timing, tone, and repetition. Systems expose their weaknesses through overcorrection and delay. You no longer analyze these things consciously. Recognition happens instinctively. This is mastery without display. Growth continues, but it is solitary, quiet, and uninterested in witness. Nothing announces it. Nothing seeks validation. Progress compounds in silence until its effects can no longer be ignored. Those who once harmed you or underestimated you cannot reach you now because they cannot locate you. The version of you they understood no longer exists within their frame of reference. Their influence depended on access, and access has been removed. Attempts to provoke response fall flat. Curiosity replaces control, then fades into irrelevance. You have outgrown the environment in which the damage occurred. That chapter cannot be revisited because the structure that supported it has collapsed. Your evolution is no longer emotional or reactive. It is strategic. Choices are made with long horizons in mind. Patience becomes an advantage. Restraint becomes a signal of strength. You operate beyond prediction because you are no longer governed by visible incentives. Your silence is not emptiness, it is insulation. It absorbs noise without distortion. Others sense this distance and misinterpret it as detachment or arrogance, but it is neither. It is precision. You adjust variables instead of arguing outcomes. The need to correct others dissolves because you can see where their trajectories lead. You allow people and systems to reveal themselves fully before engaging, if at all. This creates an untouchable quality, not because you are unreachable, but because you are no longer reactive to interference. Expansion happens laterally, invisibly, through alignment and accumulation. When it finally becomes visible, it appears sudden to those who were not watching closely. But nothing about it is sudden. It is the result of sustained, disciplined evolution beyond the reach of those who once believed they had influence over you. You are no longer inside the game they remember. You are operating on a level that does not register on their instruments. This is where everything settles without needing a finale. There is no confrontation waiting, no announcement meant to be heard, no moment designed for approval. The figure who once occupied space in your mind has already fallen out of relevance. Not because you chased resolution, but because you moved beyond the frame that made them significant. Whatever judgment exists now unfolds without your involvement. Systems larger than memory have already registered what was done. You are no longer a participant in that outcome. Psychological erasure does not come from effort, it comes from distance. What remains inside you is not healing as it is usually described. Nothing was repaired because nothing essential was broken. What occurred was remembering. Power did not need to be constructed, earned, or negotiated. It was reclaimed. It returned to its source once interference lost access. Authority now settles without resistance. You do not justify your direction because justification implies permission. Authorship has fully shifted. Your life responds to internal order rather than external pressure. Access is limited without hostility. Boundaries hold without defense. Sovereignty does not perform. It exists. There is a quiet inevitability in this awareness, a steadiness that does not rise or fall with circumstance. You are not elevated by comparison, but by position. Awareness has placed you where noise cannot reach and influence cannot penetrate. The urge to look backward fades because nothing behind you has jurisdiction anymore. Memory loosens its grip when it is no longer consulted for identity. You are not transforming into something unfamiliar. You are returning to what existed before distortion, before interruption, before outside authority attempted definition. This is the crown, not granted by recognition or conflict, but seated through awareness. It cannot be removed because it was never handed to you. It rests because you are finished asking who you are allowed to be. Your inner world operates without opposition. Decisions move forward without witnesses. Power circulates inward instead of outward. Nothing that once touched you has access to this position. Nothing that once defined you can reach this altitude. You stand authored, aligned, and complete, not as a reaction to the past, but as the final authority over yourself.